All right, we're live in the council chambers from City Hall. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. So we'll go to disclosures of pecuniary interest. Are there any disclosures? There being none, we'll move on to the consent matters. 2.1 is going to be pulled. There'll be a brief staff report on that. Any other matters? There being none, I wonder if someone's prepared to move the balance of the consent items. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. And any comments? We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion passed 6-0.
Moving on to item 2.1, which is the Adelaide Street North grade separation. Mr. McRae, you have a brief, some brief comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Really pleased to be at this stage in this project. There was a lot of hard work that went into the environmental assessment phase, and I'm pleased to say that it passed and there were no objections, and that's a result of hard work on behalf of the project team and also the community association, stakeholder groups, the Old East Village BIA and Community Association, Woodfield, Piccadilly, a couple of folks in the gallery representing those groups, and yeah, it's been a great partnership. Also a lot of talks with the key partner, the Canadian Pacific Railway. So the solution that was landed upon was an underpass, and this reduces property impacts and visual intrusion into the neighborhood, but it does add to the engineering complexity. So the project is a complex one. It involves the relocation of significant city and privately owned utilities. It includes a temporary road detour for the construction phase with a temporary rail crossing protection. A large excavation that extends below the water table, and associated with that requires a pump station to deal with both the groundwater and the overland stormwater flows. A pair of rail bridges, and then finally the roadway, a re-implementation of the roadway with two traffic signals. So certainly a big project, milestone project, and the cost estimate was pegged at $58 million. The purpose of the report tonight is to award the detailed design. And when we advance through phases of projects, we assess how the project team is functioning, and when we have a consultant on board for complex projects like this, because of the expertise required, we decide whether we should roll forward with that consulting team. And we often do that. It improves efficiency, saves time, and brings, because it brings forward a lot of the intimate knowledge of the discussions, the detailed discussions that the consultant has had with groups like the railway, where we need to work through their concerns and also leverage details that can subsequently reduce the project cost. So we find, it's a good way to manage consultant performance, and it also increases accountability because we can hold the consultant responsible for work they did in the prior phase. So as we do this, we use several metrics to make sure it's the right decision. One, we ensure that the hourly rates are consistent with the original competitive proposal. So the outset of this project was a competitive proposal process to bring WSP Group on board. Their billing through all phases is required to be hourly. So we make sure the rates are consistent and then the future allocations of hours are appropriate for the project. And then finally, at a high level, we consider the value of the design phase as a percentage of the overall project value. And for this design value is 6% of the construction value. So it's that's at the low end of what we would expect. So we feel it's very reasonable. And to put it in perspective, it's 2.4 million of a $58 million project. So 53 of the $58 million goes towards property and construction costs. And so making sure we have the right team on board to do the design phase can lower the costs of the much larger design and property consultant, property acquisition stages of it. So with that, that's the background on the recommendation for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Committee, questions or comments? Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to your staff. This company will be going on to do probably the construction administration. What's a typical percent for something like that? I'm sure that's there's a range of values, but what might we expect for the administration cost for a $58 million project?
The construction administration of a construction contract is typically approximately the same magnitude as the design. So for this, we have to work through a lot of design details before we scope that out and land on the final value of it. But I would expect it to be similar to the design phase for this project, assuming that we are able to still leverage those low percentages, the low percentage that we're seeing here for the design phase.
Okay, well, I wish you all the best with that leveraging. Thank you very much for the work.
Mayor Holder.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff, I appreciate the report, and I can say to you this is an important project whose time has come. And it's that timing I'd just like to ask a question about, and that is that from the standpoint of completion, it looks like, according to this, that the construction work is planned to take place in 2021, 2022. Partly in the spirit that time is money, but also partly in the spirit that if that's best intent, that's one thing, but is there any prospect that we can move this up by months to speed this project up in some fashion? I think certainly Londoners deserve and have been very patient and tolerant of the impediments associated with train crossings, and at that intersection is one of the pinch points. What's your sense of being able to expedite this, if I might ask, any faster? And if we did not, would it be a budgeting limitation issue? Or is this as fast as it can possibly go from the standpoint of safety and proper timing of construction? And I guess what I'm asking, Chair, through you is, can we imagine this could be moved up another 6 months for London's sake? Thank you.
Thank you. We've heard Council's desire for this project to be delivered as quickly as possible, and that is how the project is being managed. It's an ASAP delivery. What really constrains the project schedule is the property acquisition. There are some complex involved property acquisitions, full buyouts of businesses. So we need to treat those property owners fairly and give time to work through those processes and provide fair compensation and time for them to work through what they need to do on their end. So we've started that process with the completion of the environmental assessment. It's full steam ahead on that. And if we're able to work through the property acquisition quicker, it will enable a quicker completion of the project. But it's hard to commit to that because there's processes, legislative processes that really dictate how that process unfolds.
Thank you. Councillor Lehman, before you start, I just want to apologize. At the last council meeting, I forgot to congratulate you on being elected Vice Chair of the Civic Works Committee. That was my mistake. So I want to congratulate you now. And being my Vice Chair, you'll have to be a patient person.
Probably the greatest honor that has been instilled in me in the last 10 years. Thank you, Councillor Squire. Through the chair, Mr. McRae, I share the mayor's enthusiasm for acting on this quickly. And I also want to emphasize that we keep on top of this construction schedule for the effect it's going to have on businesses on Adelaide. This is a fairly significant construction period, and there will be detours that I read. So I hope that we keep in mind that people's livelihoods will be affected around this area. I'd like to just address the cost sharing with CP is estimated at 15%. Has that already been negotiated with CP? And if not, will this company that we're considering be involved in that negotiation, and what past experience have they had in negotiating with railway companies? Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Through the chair, those discussions are underway. The railway company prefers to negotiate directly with the city when it comes to high order things of that magnitude. However, the consultant was supportive of us in those discussions and provided us a lot of technical support and negotiation points that we can use. So that process is underway, and we plan a report in the near future when possible to bring that to this committee to get an approval on that moving forward.
Thank you, Chair, and just through you to the staff, I want to say glad to see that there were no Part 2 orders. You mentioned that property acquisition could be the part that extends the length of time, and that's true now that there's no Part 2 orders, right? Because that could have been a big delay to the project if there had been. And I think it's a credit to the staff and the consultants who are working on the project and the community members who tried to design the best possible underpass for this area so that we get a good grade separation that's not going to further divide Woodfield and Old East Village. It's going to actually work for all the kinds of different people using the underpass, not just single motor vehicles, but all different users. So I think it's a really good outcome to get through the EA process with no Part 2 orders. I wanted to just comment on that. In terms of the 4 to 6 week closure, while I guess the ends of Adelaide Street are lowered to match the underpass, is this going to be a closure that, even though there's a temporary road, this is just going to be a total closure of Adelaide, or is any traffic going to be able to get through there when we're doing the lowering? I imagine that you're still going to be able to use the detour road, but it's not clear to me in the report what the impacts of that are going to be.
Thank you. Through the chair, in the design phase, we are going to get into a whole lot of detail on the construction staging. And so yes, there is a detour that'll serve for the bulk of the construction process. And we know there's space for 2-lane detour. We're going to see if we can squeeze a 3-lane. There is not enough space for a 4-lane just due to the constraints of the rail infrastructure that's in place. But that will make it, it'll, even at 2 lanes, we know it can serve to move approximately 70% of the traffic on Adelaide Street. So it'll be a huge benefit for the project. However, there are times when we do need to tie in at either end of the project, and the nature of the construction will be that there will be times where Adelaide Street has to be entirely closed. We're going to brainstorm, and we're going to bring a contractor on board in the design phase to see how we can execute that as efficiently as possible to try to squeeze that time frame down as much as possible, because we know that's a huge impact. But yes, it will be necessary to close Adelaide Street entirely for short durations.
Thank you, and having gone through a number of these bigger construction projects where there's total closures, I'm starting to learn some of the things you gotta really be worried about, like rain, for example. I know you probably don't know these things, but in terms of, like, at this point, because the design work is not done yet and you don't have all the schedule worked out yet, but in terms of communicating with people in the area around when these projects are gonna happen, the total closures, sort of what is the approach that you're gonna be taking to kind of keep people up to speed? Is it gonna be more similar to what we're seeing with Dundas Place downtown? Or more similar to, say, what we might have seen with Florence Street a couple years ago? You know, both were really big projects, but I think we've been changing how we're communicating with people, especially when there's businesses on the street, in terms of how they're gonna be impacted, what kind of delays there might be, 4 to 6 weeks. That's actually a big difference between 4 and 6. And sometimes it's 7 or 8, depending on you lose a week to rain or something like that. So I'm just wondering if you could just comment on that, because it's going to be important for the businesses and the residents, especially when it gets time to the really big ones like the full closures and pieces like that.
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, we've certainly continued to strive for continuous improvement on our communications aspect, and we have a very linked working relationship with our communications department, a defined person on these construction projects. And we've developed a lot of good processes through the downtown construction coordination, so a lot of unique processes that we're getting calls from other municipalities from across the country asking about, hearing about the good things that we're doing here in London. So we're going to leverage those lessons learned on all other projects. We typically bring in March a report to this committee that's an update and a presentation of the upcoming capital projects for the year. And at that time, we'll touch on some of the things that we're doing on the communications front as well, such as improvements to our Renew London website, direct links to the Waze traffic app, items like that. So certainly we continue to set the bar higher, and that'll be the intent on this project.
Two last points very briefly, and I appreciate the indulgence of the committee. One is around temporary traffic calming. Even when we had the Oxford and Adelaide Street intersection impinged briefly in August, the kind of traffic impacts that we saw in both the Woodfield side and the Piccadilly side and the part that's in my ward in Ward 4 were pretty significant. And that's just such a major road. I know we're thinking about that, but are we looking to be proactive in terms of temporary traffic calming to be deployed on either side of Adelaide to try and mitigate as much as we can from the overflow and the impacts from the detouring?
The answer is yes. The disruption like this to a major arterial road encompass us to look at ways to mitigate those impacts to the neighborhood. We know on the west side of Adelaide Street that there's a grid network there that'll be prone to cut through traffic. So that's something that we've started doing a few years ago, and we find it's well received. And if anything, it's a difficult one to manage because then we get requests for more. But we'll certainly look for routes, key desire lines, and try to mitigate the impacts to the local businesses, or the local neighborhoods.
Thank you very much. And I don't want to get into this one too much, but just to give me a sense of when the timeline would be for this kind of discussion. Obviously, building a temporary road through what is currently McMahon Park is going to be very disruptive. There's a whole bunch of trees that are going to be impacted. We're going to have a road in there for a couple of years where people are going to be detouring. That's going to impinge on sort of people's usage of the park, obviously, while the construction is happening. And then there's the restoration afterwards. So at what point are we going to be clear with the community about what's going to happen in terms of the park specifically, how it's going to be restored, the kind of compensation for the trees that might have had to be removed for the construction, what it's going to look like afterwards? Is that a process we're going to be discussing in Civic Works? Is it something that's going to come through parks planning? Where does that land, and sort of when is the timeline for that?
Internally, we have been in discussions with parks, and I know they have certain plans for that park. From this project's perspective, we will share any disruptions at a future public meeting, and likely before that, we'll probably get information on the website through social media. The good working relationship we have with the community associations has been very fruitful in getting information out. They've been wonderful on their end, so we'll continue the ongoing dialogue with them and to help share that. I can't speak for Parks, but I think their plans are in development as well. So if there is an opportunity to combine the future plans for the parks with this project and give the information out in a more holistic manner, that'll certainly be the intent.
Anything further from committee? Just from the chair, I've had the experience the last 2 summers of having the Western Road project in my ward, and that was a big project. That was, the bridge had to be widened, the street was widened, and initially that was a project where that street was, I think it was going to be closed for 9 months. That was at the beginning of the project. There was going to be an absolute closure, and it never happened. The engineering was able to overcome that, and there was no closure. So I'm optimistic about this also. I think you're giving us a cautious look at it, but I think we'll probably do better. The second thing is the communications part of it. I can tell anyone who is concerned that as I had issues with constituents on the ground, they could be dealt with immediately and corrected immediately to the extent that that it really went quite smoothly. There was obviously upset that something was closed for that long, but the communications worked very well. So I can indeed say that we're ready to do this project, and I hope it goes well. So I'll just need a motion now from to accept this. Councillor Lehman and Councillor Lewis second. Anything further? It will come up.
Closing the vote, motion passed 6-0.
All right, moving on to the items for direction. This is, item 4.1 was Councillor Hillier's matter. He's indicated to me that he's talked to staff about this matter, and he's content that it just be, this letter be received and filed, that it'll be dealt with offline. So if I could just have a motion to do that. Councillor Pelosi will move it. Seconder, Councillor Lehman. Any discussion? Vote will come up.
Okay, so.
4.1.
Are we, okay, we're waiting for the mayor, or should I, he's back now?
Oh.
Okay, yeah.
This is just a receive and file vote, Mr. Mayor. I can assure you that there'll be no harm in voting yes.
Okay, then you need to vote. There you go.
Closing the vote, motion passed 6-0.
Moving on to item 5.1, which is snow clearing standards. Councillor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to my colleagues here. I'm sure that many of you heard on the 6-month or so public engagement campaign we did last summer and fall that one of the things that residents would like to see in the city is improved basic services, and snow clearing was one of them. We all heard it on the doorsteps in our wards, I'm quite sure. And so what I want to do today is bring forward a motion that gives staff the opportunity to put together a menu of options for us, including the resources that will be required for them to deliver on these new options. There's obviously a budgetary impact, and this will allow us to hear back on our options before we move into the next multi-year budget phase and plan for that accordingly in terms of what our council members want to do. So I really hope that we're able to come back with an a la carte menu, so to speak, of options that are available that we can pick from. Because one thing that I think we've all heard from residents in London is they're not happy with the status quo. Whether it's residential streets or sidewalks or bus stops, they would like to see a better job of snow removal happening in the city. So I'd like to move that staff be directed to investigate and report back before the next multi-year budget process begins on the operational and budget impact of lowering the clearing of residential streets from 10 centimeters to 8 centimeters and 7 centimeter options. The capital costs for new equipment and options for faster response times during heavy or consecutive snowfall events. On lowering the threshold of sidewalk clearing from 8 centimeters to 5 centimeters. To ensure that school walking routes are cleared as a priority, and to conduct a review of the current snow plowing routes and available technologies to implement smarter, more flexible and responsive snow clearing.
Thank you very much. And can I get a seconder for that before it moves on? Councillor Van Holst will second it. And maybe staff could just comment on if there's any difficulty with providing a report back before the next budget cycle.
Thank you. Yeah, we're certainly happy to take a look at this. It's a service that's been through some reviews in the past. It's obviously a very visible one that Londoners rely on. And so we feel, it's been tweaked quite well. It currently complies with the provincial maintenance standards. So there's a certain baseline that's been established through provincial committees that provide those standards, and it provides a good defense as far as liability goes. But if council wishes to exceed those standards, that's certainly within the realm of possibilities, and we can go away and deliver a menu of options. And we're certainly happy. We'll probably use it a little bit of judgment, and but I think we know what you're looking for here, and try to come up with some options that could be dealt with in the multi-year budget. So. Not a problem. Pleased to do that.
So just to clarify, it would be report back with options and costs of the different options. Would that be what we would be getting?
Yes, it would be options and costs, and we would also lay out some of the logistical implications. So based on equipment availability, staffing resources, it'd be cost plus also probably phase-in periods for the different options depending on what the impacts are.
Thank you very much. So just before I went through the discussion, just to remember, we're not making a decision to change our policies today. We're just sending it to staff for them to come back. So comments from committee? Councillor Van Holst, did you?
Oh, thank you. Since we're talking about snow removal, I think that some communities have people and businesses clear their own sidewalks in front. Have we considered an option like that?
When we report back, we can certainly lay out a lot of the details about how the processes work. We currently require businesses in the downtown area to clear the sidewalks along their frontage, but it's localized to the downtown.
Anything further on that? So we will call up the vote on that. Anybody else have any comments? No? Oh, Councillor Lewis, if you'd like to sum up?
Yes, if I can just wrap up, and particularly for people who may be watching or viewing at home and you feel that your street is often the last cleared, let me tell you that councillors share your pain. I'm pretty sure yours is the second last cleared because mine is the last cleared. So I think that we just want you to know that we've heard you, and we'll look at options to make this better. We'll see if we can get Councillor Squire's street cleared last.
Always appreciated. So we'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion passed 6-0.
Moving on to the next item, which is the report of the 5.2, which is the report of the first meeting of the Cycling Advisory Committee. I would just like to direct the committee's attention to item 2.1, where the committee asked that a left turn be created on Wilton Grove Road. The appropriate wording would actually be asking staff to consider a turning lane there. They can't. It's not proper for the advisory committee to just ask for something to be turning lane to be created. So if someone would move it and second it, we just need a motion to amend that wording. And the clerk has it, I believe.
Yep, it's up there.
All right. Where is it?
Second hit, refresh. Go down. No, next one.
All right. So if you'll see the motion there. Is someone prepared to move that?
The mayor.
The Mayor Holder will move. Councillor Van Holst will second. Anything further? Calling the vote.
Closing the vote, motion passed 6-0.
And moving on to the final matter, which is item 5.3, which is the Bus Rapid Transit Plan proposed future public participation meeting. Councillor Van Holst?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This one may go quicker than expected, but nevertheless, maybe I'll ask to draw people's attention to page 57 of the added agenda. And that's, I've shown a framework here to look at problem solving, and we're looking at solving our transportation problems. And I noticed that section 7 there, acceptance, we've got a BRT plan, but it's not that popular. We'll need to have a conversation of why that is the case. And I thought that conversation was going to start on Thursday at the Rapid Transit Implementation Working Group. And then I wanted to make sure that since we're not meeting for a couple of weeks, or for another 2 cycles, that we also brought the public online with these discussions. But they're not going to happen for another month. I don't think there's a need to have public participation meetings before council has even had a chance to discuss the issue itself. So I think I'll just, the best thing to do here is just move to receive and file this, and I can bring the motion forward another time after we've had a chance to discuss this.
All right, thank you very much, Councillor. Anybody second that, please? Councillor Lewis, any discussion? Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Councillor Van Holst, for bringing this forward and then moving to receive and file. At the last meeting, we approved the bringing in of an expert to talk to us about autonomous vehicle technology as well. And I think that that's an important piece for us to hear from before we consider any public participation further on this topic as well. So I think that receiving it and filing it for now is the right thing to do.
Anything further? All right, I'll call the vote. Voting.
Closing the vote, motion passed 6-0.
And I need a motion for adjournment. Moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Lewis. Do we need to vote on that on screen? All in favor, just hands. Thank you very much.